Hello, I'm Nick. I spend a bit of my time teaching XSLT. I spend a bit of my time wandering around the internet trying to answer questions about XSLT, and I spend most of my time writing XSLT for a living. Right now at Cambridge University Press, various other places, I'm basically a publishing person, not a data XML person. So much of what I say here might be biased, but that's my worldview. And frankly, what I'm talking about here is how to be wrong on the internet anyway. So, what's this all about? Well, I've been thinking much of the last few years about the fact that the internet has dramatically changed the way that we learn new skills and dramatically changed the way we teach new skills. I don't know how many people here work in the training industry apart from me. I work for Learning Tree quite a lot, so I work for a big commercial training company. And the way that their courses have been successful over the last few years could be described as, well, they haven't. All the big training companies have seen their sales do something like that. They all thought it was due to the last recession, but no one has recovered. So that means that the things that have happened on the internet have become more important. People are turning to online for their training. And I don't know if anyone remembers when the newspapers started going bust. One of the things that they all talked about was the idea that there was a crisis of authority. That the whole idea that you went to the newspapers to get your information and they were right suddenly stopped being true. Because anyone could say anything on the internet, and you started to need a new measure. You needed to have a measure that said, how can I be confident something is correct or true? And on the internet, we tend to look at that as some sort of ranking score. Stack Overflow, perfect example. On Stack Overflow, you get a reputation. Mine is not very good. There are people in this room who have 16 times the reputation I do. And this started because I had an argument with someone who had a reputation 18 times mine. So basically what this is all about is how I was completely and utterly wrong on the internet and what it made me think about. So what happened? StackOverflow.com. February 2017, I answered a question. And I answered the question in the way that many, many people answer questions on Stack Overflow, which is they just quickly dash off something. And it probably is right, and it is just the answer. Now, as someone who claims to be a professional trainer, that was a dreadful thing to do. Because, as it's naming names here, there are some people who will answer a question on Stack Overflow and they'll say, here is your answer. And there are some people like Michael Kay who will say, I don't actually want to answer your question, but here is what you need to do. That is probably the right thing to do. And I didn't. So, quick look at the question. This gentleman asked, how do I extract the unique inputs from this XML? So, typo there, that should say XML, not XSLT. Yeah, this is embarrassing because I am actually married to a proofreader. And I wanted to give a really simple answer to this. I subscribe to the lying to children approach to teaching that says you explain something that works, and then later on you probably explain the details. That works really, really well in a training course where I've got 3 days of context to explain something to someone. And when I do that on Stack Overflow, it works incredibly badly. So I gave, this was his desired output. You can prove that this is a real question by, here we go, the actual question on Stack Overflow. And you will see that my mark got accepted, but deservedly got marked as -1, because I gave technically a correct answer, but a really, really unuseful one. I can try. There we go. -1. That was the right thing to give me on that question.
You know that the the original question, though, said XSLT, not extract from XML. Oh, yeah.
You're right. I did actually just copy and paste from the internet. Hey! I've obviously got this slide deck up at least twice, so oh well. Let's find. So there's the answer I gave. These are technically correct. They do work. I assume most people here know at least enough XSLT to know that what I'm doing here is counting the preceding siblings and saying, if there aren't any of the same name, on the same name attribute value, suppress the answer. And I gave an XSLT2 question answer because I really like using the predicate to control things like that, and I like suppressing things with predicates, and that's the way I like to do stuff. And at this point, Martin Holland popped up and said, that should be done with Munchian grouping. And I said, I don't want to explain Munchian grouping. And at this point, I thought, well, I turned into a programmer at this point, I think. I gave no explanation. I got the accepted answer, but it wasn't a very good one. It led to an argument with no resolution because I decided I was cross and didn't actually follow up. And Martin pointed at a really old reference. It was Jenny Tennyson, and it was a blog post she wrote 17 years ago. And I thought, this should be in the XSLT FAQ. So I went off, talked to Dave Pawson, and said, well, don't actually update that anymore. And I thought, that's probably a bad sign. So I thought, well, I know what I should do here. I'll try and solve this. My pride had been wounded. So I thought, is there some data to back that up? Because my thought was, in a modern environment, Munchian grouping won't be any faster. Modern XSLT processors will solve this problem for me. So I thought, I'll get some data. So I wrote a program that generated from something that looked like that. Let me make that bigger because it generated, basically I took a piece of code that generated from 1 to 1,000 elements and then duplicated up to 50% of them and randomized it. Which is great because I got to play with XSLT's random number generator in XSLT3. So actually I learned some stuff here as well because I learned some stuff in XSLT3 that I didn't already know. Which is one of the great things about being wrong is you learn stuff. I also went all the way up to 990 elements. I went to 990, not 1,000, because I got the program wrong. But as you can see, this is really, really boring data. And not only that, it's nothing like the real world. But then neither was his question. This was the best approximation I could get. But Jenny had said this. And Jenny terrifies me. She is so much more intelligent than I am that I don't want to contradict anything she's ever said. But on the other hand, the best reference is 17 years old. So I thought, let's write the program and run it. So 17,000 XML documents. I started out with the process that generated 1 million, and then realized that I didn't actually have enough time to process all of them. I varied the number of unique elements. I varied the number of duplications because I think that gives me an idea of roughly how things will vary when I run this program. I ran some style sheets, got some timings. I tried this with Saxon 9.7, XSLT proc, MSXSL. I did want to do this with XSLT, but Abel's web server had a problem. And by the time he actually got me up to the point where I could get it up and running on my Mac yesterday, there was a bar to go to. A bar. So I had a choice of running this again with XSLT or going to the pub. And I'm sorry, but I went to the pub.
Wrong again.
So, what did I get? Well, I got some quite shocking results, actually. That orange line is my solution. Let me see if I can make this bigger. That probably opens in a new tab where. That's a different one. There we go. Slightly bigger. So I tried this with XSLT proc and predicates, and that really wasn't good. So my solution, not great. I tried XSLT proc and grouping, mentioning grouping, that's down the bottom somewhere. MSXSL and predicates. And one of the things I learned here is that MSXSL is shockingly fast at this, to the extent that I actually started worrying about whether I was interpreting its timings wrongly. Because it was, at worst, slightly over 100 times faster than XSLT proc. And I did make sure I wasn't taking up program startup time when I ran the tests. I didn't count startup time. I only counted the time to process the XSLT itself. Saxon was somewhere down there as well, both solutions. So the basic answer to this is, one of the questions that was asked was, what processor is he using? And I thought, it doesn't matter anymore. Having come from an environment fairly recently where if it didn't run on .NET or Microsoft made it, you weren't going to be able to use the product, I probably should have thought more about that. And if you go through Stack Overflow, you will find that about 20% of the people asking questions about XSLT are in a Microsoft environment and are probably using XSLT1, which is sad. But it does mean that, right, answer a question on Stack Overflow, make sure you understand the person's environment as well as the question. I didn't bother to do that. That was foolish. Oh, tabs. So a little more detail. This is the results of running it, different variations of XSLT proc, MSXSL, and Saxon. I actually had to shift the baseline up here. So another great thing I learned to do this was how to use GNU plot. And I know how to make things look slightly pretty with GNU plot because Charles looked at my graphs and said those aren't nice enough to do them again. And we can see that XSLT proc, as I get more random and larger data sets, it does get worse, but it actually is pretty level. The Saxon and MSXSL, can't really see Saxon because it's so close to MSXSL in this that they're the same color. I do need to still know more about GNU plot, but it demonstrated that the variation isn't that bad. And if you look, the worst case solution, which is when I have 50% randomness and about 1,000 elements, 990 because I got it wrong, but our worst processing time is 1,600 milliseconds. So in a way, I do feel slightly justified. My simple answer wasn't too awful. Of course, in some real-world environment, that probably would make it a lot worse. But if we look at the grouping one, we see that the worst-case scenario is 16 milliseconds, which does mean that I was 90 times worse than the best possible. I did try this with XSLT 2 and 3 solutions as well, and not solutions I'd suggested online. We drop into Oxygen. There's our XSLT 1 predicate solution, XSLT 1 grouping solution. I'm sorry, yeah, I can see it perfectly well because I'm right here. So there's our mentioned grouping solution. I feel a bit of a fool now because actually once I'd written it, I went, why did I not want to bother to explain this? Although I do feel in some ways that perhaps 17 years later we shouldn't still need to do this. The fact that there are an awful lot of people using Microsoft XSLT processors still means it is still relevant, and I should have explained. Yeah, psi is the right answer. There's my XSLT1. I tried it using for each group. Bigger. So all of these basically doing the same thing. I used the predicate in XSLT2. I decided to try it using XSL mode, which interestingly was very, very slightly slower. than actually putting an explicit identity in. I'm not quite sure why. I wondered, I'm just doing the bigger, there we go. Whether XSLT3 itself would make a difference? No. No, I didn't. I probably should have done. And the absolute fastest solution, which unfortunately is one of those ones where when you see an answer on Stack Overflow and they answer the absolute specific problem and nothing else, so you cannot generalize it. This is a great answer for that. I cannot generalize this at all. Any different content and this would not be right. But that was way faster than anything else. But that would be absolutely fine in this one circumstance. Any data structure there and yeah, that solution doesn't work. So on one of these tabs here, here's my XSLT 2 and 3 summary. It was pretty erratic, actually. Apologies for the two different colors. One of them's supposed to say without XSL mode, but the bottom one is without XSL. Yeah, the bottom one is without XSL mode. The top one is with. So we can see that you definitely should consider using distinct values. This is a completely over-the-top reaction to being told that I'd got the wrong answer on Stack Overflow. But it was a fun exercise. But it did make me think, what's Stack Overflow for? Is it for asking questions, or is it for teaching? As someone who teaches, I tend to think it's for teaching. So when I see an answer on Stack Overflow that just says, here's the answer to your question, and doesn't explain anything, I think that's wrong, because you can't generalize from it. And that means you end up with 9,000 questions that are almost exactly the same. Does that have an effect on teaching? Well, I have taught training courses in the last year or two where people have said, but I found this answer on Stack Overflow. So it is having an impact. I think that implies that those of us who answer questions on Stack Overflow need to think about what we say. I don't know that I'm right, because I come at this from a biased point of view of I'm used to running 3-day training courses. And a 3-line answer is kind of out of context for me. So I wondered, how do people learn stuff? So I did a survey. Thank you for the 60-odd people who answered it, and quite a few of whom are in this room. I asked, if you want to learn a new skill, my title's vanished, oh well, how do you do it? And you can see only 10% people now would go on a formal training course. That matches with my experience. I've gone down from 2007 or so, I was running around about 10 XSLT courses a year. Now I'm running 2. Yeah, you've probably got similar experience.
So do we.
Yeah. And what I have found, though, is in the last 3 years, I have run 1 XSLT 1 course a year. Thames Valley Police being the most recent. And 71.05% of people, I allowed people to do multiple choices here, by the way. This is why. One of the things I learned about this, doing this exercise is I'm not very good at writing surveys. So the answers possibly aren't as good as they could have been had I asked someone who was used to doing this to help. But that, 71% of people look for online tutorials. They don't look for training. They don't look for video training. People are just going off and finding it out for themselves now. That's a massive change in the way people learn stuff. I can't get the title. Yes, I can get the title back. So how would you go about solving a problem? And 76% of people said use an online QA forum. That, again, huge difference. Look for training, 13% of people. I think that's a result of 2 things. One, there is so much information on the internet that we can go away and find it now. That's brilliant in many ways. And I don't want to be rude about Stack Overflow because I think it's brilliant, but it and its peers have changed things dramatically. And at least 34% of people said they'd read the manual, which I was quite shocked by because that's usually the very, very last thing a developer does. If all else fails, read the manual. Yeah, I did say, how would you solve a problem within your existing skill set? So, and that I thought was the most interesting question. 97.3% of people who answered this said they use things like Stack Overflow. I possibly should have asked, do you use Stack Overflow, rather than things similar to Stack Overflow. But I don't think there are that many things that are similar. And 2.7 said no.
That's one person, right?
Yes. Basically, on my answer set, that's one person said no.
Did they click the wrong button?
I do have to wonder about that, yes. Although I do know that there are a couple of people who weren't XML people who answered this as well. I did say, XML people, but some of the people who answered either are no longer or aren't XML people at all. But if we're going to teach a subject like XSLT, that means a lot. That means the way people are absorbing their learning has changed dramatically. So I wondered what about the mailing list? Let me try and make this bigger as well. So I compared traffic on Stack Overflow. This data.stackexchange.com is awesome, especially if you like Transact SQL, because it sits on top of SQL Server and you can ask it anything, sort of. So you can see that traffic on the Mulberry list has gone down. Traffic on Stack Overflow went up and is now going down. Obviously, that last bar is meaningless because I did this on the 2nd of a month. But you can see that people are going to Stack Overflow these days. And that, again, we've got to bear that in mind when we try and teach stuff.
Is that questions asked or visits?
That was questions and answers. Because on the Mulberry mailing list, I couldn't really easily tell the difference between a question and an answer.
So if people find an existing answer on Stack Overflow, it won't be recorded?
No, it won't. That is just question and answer traffic. So what's wrong? Nothing's wrong with Stack Overflow. It's awesome. But there are problems. Answers of competition. I asked how many people, in the survey I asked how many people pay attention to the reputation of the person answering the question. 67% said no. So although we've got a ranking for reputation on Stack Overflow, people don't use it. One person, who I'm sure was someone in this room, said, I rely on my existing knowledge of the person's skills in the subject. That had to be someone who's here, really, I think. So the answers tend to be a competition. People try and get their answer in first. That tends to imply that I'm going to dash down the answer quickly without explaining it will happen. There's a dreadful Me Too syndrome on Stack Overflow where people will change one little thing and give you another. Here's a variant on that other solution. It has no concept of authority. Authority is based in the rank, and if people aren't paying attention to rank, that's kind of problematic. And it has no context. You have no idea who's telling you this. And yes, I did go and find the archetypal cartoon. And I even paid to license it because it was $10. Stack Overflow is brilliant if you have questions and answers. The thing that I find Stack Overflow useful for is talking to people who know the really complicated answers. But most of the time, if I answer a complicated question, it doesn't get asked. If I ask a complicated question, it doesn't get answered. And that has serious impact. This is what Stack Overflow is about, really, when it comes to it. Reputation. The second highest ranked person on XSLT has his Stack Overflow description says, I was the first to get these badges. I'm not sure that's what it should be about. But if you can see, there are, Mike K, your reputation is about 88,000, I seem to remember. Martin Holland's is 90-something thousand, and Dmitry Novotchev's is 191,000, which is astonishing. The amount of time spent on Stack Overflow to actually get that terrifies me. But what you can see is this is the mean asker and answer reputation. Even with those ridiculously high scores, they've plummeted over the time. So the people are asking that. It's a bit of a broad thing, but I think we can say that the people who are asking questions are rank beginners, and the people who are answering them aren't much better.
This is just more people, right?
Well, it could be just more people, but actually the number of questions about XSLT has also dropped in a similar way. If you look back at that one, you can see that it's slowly dropping. The yellow wasn't a good colour to choose, was it?
No.
Sorry. It looked pretty in print. So, yeah, this probably wasn't what I should have thought of, really, was it? Now, I think implications to this. Those of us who answer things on Stack Overflow need to realise how important it is. Don't dash off an answer. Don't do what I did. Because that leads to passing on information that will be reused, because that's what Stack Overflow is for, that isn't the right thing to have said. So I really need to pay more attention on Stack Overflow when I answer questions, because it is now the primary way, I think, that people learn stuff. It's an incredibly successful website. It's good to have data for your answers, but this was probably a slightly over-the-top exercise. FAQs and tutorials. Before I was a XML person, I was a Perl programmer. I'm sorry. And the Perl community kind of became very inward-looking. It mostly talked to itself. This is what happens in niche languages. Perl was thought to be a dead language and a niche language when it dropped out of the top 20 most used languages. It's now back at number 10, strangely. XSLT is out of the top 100. It's in the top 150 because TOBs still track it, but they don't give a ranking for it because anything out of the top 100, they don't bother to write about it. So we are a niche language. We do talk to ourselves. Our FAQ isn't updated anymore. Our tutorials are all over the place and sometimes 17 years old. The way to push a community these days, the web development community looks at things that don't change and says they're dead. Lack of movement is interpreted as death by the web community. We are talking to ourselves too much. I think we need to talk more publicly about what I think is an absolutely brilliant language, personally. So the biggest takeaway from this is definitely don't believe everything you write on the internet. This came up on XKCD last week, and it was just too appropriate. So, thank you.
Thank you, Nick. Time for some questions?
Colin.
You gave us a 3-course dinner answer, okay? A beautiful buffet and crafted answers and graphs, and it's probably taken 3 days to
Is it
get
lunchtime
to
or
this
something?
point. But other people who are trying to consume this, who ask the question, basically, are going to consume your answer, just looking for fast food. Because I know it matters to you what your reputation is, especially if you're in a teaching and leading position within industry. But I do worry that, if Michael decides not to get involved in Dimitri's automatic robot, as Andrew suggested, they might have an XSLT who's generating answers. If it stops responding, then, who does respond? Because we can't all spend 3 days researching something to that sort of level. We've got to take a little bit of this is a quick answer.
The people who are consuming this, as far as I can tell, are junior developers.
Yes.
I've spent a lot of time reading Stack Overflow in the last 2 months. And this is where they're getting much of their information from. There's also an awful lot of, as I was talking about breaking people, there's a lot of questions you can interpret really easily as please do my homework.
Yeah.
And that's what you do. So I think the people consuming this are probably students and junior developers. They're not going to training anymore. But if we want them to get better at this and become part of our community and get involved and take this to an important part of their career perhaps, I think it's our responsibility to actually try and explain ourselves better. Tom?
Is there not an element of shared responsibility? I mean, I think once you are an adult, once you've left school, you have an obligation to learn as much as anybody has, or more than other people have an obligation to teach. And Dimitri's a good example because I have, if somebody's going to Stack Overflow and they want an answer to their question and they're not really interested in understanding the problem, then it's probably just as well to give them what they want and let them go away. So at least discussion can happen for anybody who is interested. Why is this relevant? But for me personally, I view Stack Overflow as a relatively senior developer when I have a particular problem or a particular algorithm. Dimitri's answers, especially if he gets into an argument with Mike, are really frustrating. Because I'm forced to work through, because he doesn't offer an explanation, I've learned more. And isn't there a counter argument to say that actually to put the onus on the student to understand the explanation is something that is a more valuable learning experience in some cases?
I would say that that's true only if they are actually in a position to take that further. I mean, I agree. For me, Dimitri's answers are brilliant. I think Stack Overflow probably has most value for people who are relatively experienced. Tony or Mike?
Yeah, I have difficulty here because I've got so much I want to say and I have trouble structuring it on the spot. I agree with an awful lot of what you say, and I share some of the same dilemmas about whether you're there to answer questions or whether you're there to teach people and make sure they don't come back and ask again, or whether you're answering the person who asked the question, or whether you're answering for posterity for other people who come and find it later. Observations about what I learned from the process of reading people's questions on Stack Overflow. The first is there are an awful lot of people in this business who have very poor learning skills and have very poor problem solving skills.
Yes.
And it's hard to address those deficiencies.
It is.
The more specifically to XSLT, we learned that there are some design faults in the language that hit absolutely everyone. There are some elephant traps. The default namespace elephant trap, which gets one question a day on Stack Overflow. Everyone falls into it. It's answered every day, and people don't find the answer because they don't know that that's the problem, and they don't search for the right keywords. So there's just a design fault in the language that we can't fix because it's too late. So what do we do about that? I have no idea. The other thing how to answer the question. Partly I ration my time. I'm not prepared to go to Dimitri's length of writing a complete style sheet and testing it before I put it in the answer. And I do. Yes, Dimitri's answers are challenging in that he doesn't give an explanation, therefore you have to study them in order to understand the code. I worry that people will just cut and paste.
I think most people just copy and paste. That's my worry.
So programming by cut and paste is something that worries me, and I deliberately don't offer people code they can cut and paste because I want them to understand the solution. And this is, the other thing is that Stack Overflow does not help people understand concepts. There's just no mechanism in the Stack Overflow process that enables people to to understand the concepts that are new of rule-based programming or declarative programming or whatever it is they haven't come across before. It's addressing people at the level of chapter 5 of a book and not at chapter 1 of a book.
Yes.
And how you solve that gap that they haven't read chapter 1 is one that I don't know the answer to.
No, I don't. I was vaguely hoping that someone would come up with an answer to that here.
I think it's best that we take more questions at the lunch break.
Yes, perhaps.
Okay. But thank you very much, Nick.